Australia is rich, or at least it appears to be. It has the highest median wealth per adult of any country in the world, higher than the United States, higher than Switzerland, higher than Norway. The average Australian household is worth over $400,000. Australians enjoy a high standard of living, beautiful cities, beaches, a stable democracy. And the country has not experienced a recession in over 30 years, the longest uninterrupted period of economic growth in modern history. Politicians in Australia celebrate this. Economists point to it as proof that their policies work. And most Australians believe their prosperity is built on solid foundations. But it is not. Australia's economy is a house built on sand. It looks impressive from the outside. Stable, wealthy, successful. But the foundation is weak, dangerously weak. Because Australia's wealth is not built on innovation, not on manufacturing, not on technology or services. It is built on three things: digging rocks out of the ground and selling them to China, a housing bubble that has inflated household wealth to absurd levels, and household debt that is among the highest in the world. These three pillars are not strong, they are fragile, and they are interconnected in ways that make the entire structure vulnerable. If China's economy slows, Australian exports collapse. If the housing bubble bursts, household wealth evaporates. If interest rates rise, household debt becomes unserviceable. And all three of these risks are not hypothetical. They are real, they are growing, and they are inevitable. Australia's 30-year run without a recession has not been because of superior economic management. It has been luck. Luck that China industrialized and needed Australian commodities. Luck that interest rates stayed low for decades. Luck that the housing bubble kept inflating. But luck runs out. And when it does, Australia's house built on sand will collapse. This is the Wealth Records, where every video will change how you see money, history, and the systems controlling your life. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to learn is something most Australians refuse to believe. Their prosperity is not sustainable, and the reckoning is coming. If you're Australian, do you think the economy is as strong as politicians claim? Or do you see the cracks? Drop your honest take below. To understand why Australia's economy is built on sand, you need to understand what Australia actually produces. Because for all its wealth, Australia does not make much. It does not have a significant manufacturing sector. It does not produce technology. It does not have major global brands in software, pharmaceuticals, or consumer goods. What Australia has is commodities: iron ore, coal, natural gas, gold, copper, resources that are dug out of the ground, minimally processed, and exported, mostly to one country, China. China accounts for roughly 35% of all Australian exports. Iron ore alone is over 20% of total exports. Coal is another 10%, natural gas, gold. The list goes on. Australia is a quarry, and China is its customer. This worked beautifully for 30 years. From the 1990s through the 2010s, China was industrializing at a pace never seen in human history, building cities, factories, infrastructure, roads, bridges, skyscrapers. All of it required raw materials: steel, concrete, energy, and Australia had what China needed: iron ore to make steel, coal to produce energy and steel, natural gas for power. China bought everything Australia could dig up, and Australia got rich. Mining exports generated hundreds of billions of dollars. The government collected massive tax revenues from mining companies. Australians working in mining earned six-figure salaries, and the wealth flowed through the economy: construction, finance, services, real estate. Everyone benefited. Australia's GDP grew, unemployment stayed low, and Australians convinced themselves that this was permanent, that China would keep buying forever, that commodity prices would stay high forever, that the mining boom would never end. But it will, because China's economy is slowing, China's population is shrinking, its workforce is aging, its property sector, which consumed enormous amounts of steel and concrete, is collapsing. Developers are defaulting, construction has fallen off a cliff, and China's demand for Australian iron ore and coal is not going to grow. It is going to fall. And when it does, Australia's export revenues will collapse. The government's budget, which depends on mining taxes, will go into deep deficit. And the thousands of Australians employed in mining will lose their jobs. Australia has no backup plan, no alternative export market, no other industry that can replace mining. The economy is built on selling rocks to China, and when China stops buying, the foundation crumbles. But Australia's dependence on China is not the only problem. It is compounded by the fact that Australia's relationship with China is deteriorating. Over the past decade, Australia has aligned itself more closely with the United States. It joined AUKUS, a military alliance with the US and the UK aimed at countering China. It banned Huawei from its 5G networks. It called for investigations into COVID-19 origins, angering Beijing. And China responded with trade restrictions. tariffs on Australian wine, bans on Australian coal imports, restrictions on barley, beef, and lobsters. These were not permanent, but they were a warning, a demonstration that China can hurt Australia economically whenever it chooses. And Australia cannot retaliate, because Australia needs China far more than China needs Australia. China can buy iron ore from Brazil, coal from Indonesia, natural gas from Russia or Qatar, but Australia cannot easily find another buyer for the volume that China purchases. Australia is trapped. Economically dependent on a country, it is politically antagonizing. This is not a stable foundation. This is sand, and it is shifting. The second pillar of Australia's wealth is the housing bubble, and it is one of the most extreme housing bubbles in the world. Sydney's median house price exceeds $1.5 million. Melbourne is over $1 million. Even smaller cities like Brisbane and Adelaide have seen prices double in the last decade. Australian housing is more expensive relative to income than almost anywhere else on Earth. The price-to-income ratio in Sydney is over 13, in Melbourne, over 10. Economists consider 3 to 4 times income affordable. Anything above 5 is a bubble. Australia is deep into bubble territory, and this bubble is not driven by fundamentals. It is driven by speculation, tax incentives, and low interest rates. Australia's tax system encourages property speculation. Negative gearing allows property investors to deduct losses on rental properties from their taxable income. Capital gains tax is discounted by 50% if you hold a property for more than a year. These policies incentivize people to buy investment properties, not to live in, but to rent out or to hold and sell later for profit. The result is that over 30% of Australian housing is owned by investors, people who already own a home buying second, third, fourth properties, driving up prices, pricing out first-time buyers. And this is celebrated because rising house prices make existing homeowners feel wealthy, even if their income has not increased, even if they cannot actually access that wealth without selling. Australians feel rich because their house is worth $1.5 million, even if they only paid $500,000 for it. This is the wealth effect, and it drives consumer spending. Australians borrow against their home equity. They take out home equity lines of credit and spend the money on renovations, cars, vacations. They feel confident because their house is appreciating. But this wealth is not real. It is an illusion, because the value of your house only matters if you can sell it. And if everyone tries to sell it once, prices collapse, and the bubble is sustained by household debt. Australian household debt is now over 180% of income, higher than the United States, higher than Canada, among the highest in the developed world. Australians have borrowed enormous sums to buy overpriced houses, and as long as interest rates stayed low, this was manageable. Mortgage payments were affordable, even if the loan was massive. But interest rates are no longer low. The Reserve Bank of Australia has raised rates to fight inflation, and mortgage payments have surged. Australians who locked in rates at 2% are now facing renewals at 5% or 6%. Payments have doubled. Many cannot afford the new rates, but they cannot sell, because if they sell, they might get less than they owe. They are trapped, and if the housing market falls, millions of Australians will find themselves underwater, owing more than their house is worth. This is not a stable foundation. This is sand, and it is eroding. The wealth that Australians believe they have is tied up in property that is overvalued, sustained by debt, and vulnerable to any shock. A recession, rising unemployment, falling immigration. Any of these could trigger a housing crash. And when housing crashes, household wealth evaporates. Consumer spending collapses. Retail, hospitality, construction, all the industries that depend on consumer confidence, contract. Banks, which have lent hundreds of billions against overvalued property, face losses. And the economy, which has been sustained by rising house prices for 30 years, collapses. The third pillar is Australia's lack of economic diversification. Australia does not produce much beyond commodities. There is no significant manufacturing sector. Car manufacturing, which once employed tens of thousands, shut down entirely in 2017. Holden, Ford, Toyota, all closed their Australian plants. Not because of unions, not because of government policy, but because Australia could not compete. Wages were too high, the market was too small, and importing cars was cheaper than making them. Australia does not have a major technology sector. There are no Australian equivalents of Apple, Google, Microsoft, or Tesla. No global software companies, no biotech giants, no advanced manufacturing. What Australia has is services, finance, real estate, retail, hospitality, and mining. That is the economy, services, and digging up rocks. This makes Australia extraordinarily vulnerable because services depend on consumer spending, and consumer spending depends on confidence and wealth, which depends on housing and mining. If housing crashes, consumer confidence collapses. If China stops buying, mining revenues collapse. And if both happen, Australia has nothing to fall back on. There is no manufacturing base to absorb unemployed workers, no technology sector driving productivity growth, no alternative industries waiting to take over. The economy is a one-trick pony, and when the trick stops working, there's nothing else. Australia's government knows this, but it cannot fix it, because fixing it would require letting housing prices fall. And homeowners vote. Politicians who allow house prices to drop lose elections. So instead, the government props up the bubble. Through tax incentives, through immigration, Australia imports over 200,000 people per year, not because the infrastructure can support it, not because there are enough houses, but because immigration increases demand for housing, which keeps prices rising, which keeps homeowners happy, which keeps politicians in office. But this is not sustainable because infrastructure cannot keep up. Schools, hospitals, roads, public transport, all are overcrowded. And housing supply, despite record construction, cannot keep pace. Australia builds roughly 150,000 homes per year, but population growth, driven by immigration, requires over 200,000. The gap grows every year, which means prices keep rising, which means more young Australians are priced out, which means wealth inequality worsens, which creates social tension. But politicians cannot stop, because stopping immigration means housing demand falls, which means prices fall, which means the wealth effect disappears, which means consumer spending collapses, which means recession. So the government keeps immigration high, keeps the bubble inflating, and hopes it does not burst on their watch. And Australia's reliance on China makes everything worse. Because if China's economy slows, Australian mining revenues collapse, government tax revenues fall, budget deficits explode, and the government, facing a fiscal crisis, will have to cut spending or raise taxes, either of which will hurt consumer confidence, which will hurt housing, which will trigger the very crash they are trying to avoid. Australia is trapped in a doom loop. Housing depends on consumer confidence. Consumer confidence depends on wealth. Wealth depends on housing and mining. Mining depends on China, and China's economy is slowing. There is no escape. The foundation is sand, and the tide is coming in. So why has Australia avoided recession for 30 years? Luck. China industrialized at the exact moment Australia needed an export market. Interest rates fell to historic lows just as housing prices began to rise. Immigration increased just as population growth was slowing, everything aligned. But that alignment was not policy, it was chance. And when luck runs out, the structure collapses. Australia's 30-year streak is not a testament to superior economic management. It is a testament to favorable external conditions, conditions that are now changing. China is slowing, interest rates are rising, housing is unaffordable, household debt is extreme, and there is no plan B. Australia has built its economy on 3 pillars: selling commodities to China, a housing bubble sustained by debt, and immigration to keep demand high. These are not strong foundations, they are sand. And when the wind blows, when China stops buying, when interest rates rise, when the housing bubble bursts, the entire structure will come down. Australians believe they are wealthy, and on paper they are, but that wealth is not real. It is inflated by housing prices that cannot be sustained. It is dependent on a Chinese customer that is slowing, and it is built on debt that cannot be repaid if conditions change. Australia is not a modern diversified economy. It is a resource-dependent economy with a property bubble. It is not Switzerland. It is not Singapore. It is not even Canada. It is a quarry with expensive houses. And quarries run out, and houses, when they are overvalued, crash. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. Australia's house is built on sand, and the foundation is already shifting. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The Wealth Records. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.